G'day, Russell here, Prime Motion Training. If you have an unsuccessful application to join Victoria Police, the question often comes up, is this something that I can appeal? Well, Victoria Police doesn't really use the terminology appealing, but there is opportunity to have the decision reviewed. Now, it really depends on the circumstances. Some of the aspects of the recruitment process, some of the various tests that you have to pass, are really cut and dry. They're black and white. You either pass or you don't. But other sections of the recruiting process are not quite as straightforward as that. So let's say, for example, you were not able to pass the entrance exam. Well, if you don't get the right score, you don't pass. It's that simple. There's nothing to review. There's nothing to appeal. If you do the fitness testing and you can't meet the minimum fitness requirements, well, again, there's nothing to appeal. You didn't reach the minimum requirements. However, from a medical point of view, or from a psychological point of view, or maybe a character point of view, if your application is rejected for one of those reasons, you might be able to have that decision reviewed. Now let's start with the psychological interview or assessment. Quite often if someone fails that part of the process, they will be very keen to get a review done. Now you can't ask for a review. Well, you can ask for a review, but they won't give you one just because you weren't happy with the outcome. You can tell them that you're a wonderful person and you've got all these experiences and so on, but if you're not happy with the outcome, well, that's just bad luck. You'll need to reply again. They won't review their own decision because you weren't happy with the outcome. However, if you feel as though the process was not followed correctly and therefore a fair assessment wasn't done, then you might have grounds to have a review done. Here's the challenging part though. If you were to ask them, well, what is the correct process to be followed so that you can assess whether or not you feel that process was followed in your interview, they won't tell you the process. They can't tell you the process. That forms part of the psychologist's notes and we can't disclose that, which is bizarre to say the least. You can appeal if the process wasn't followed properly, but we won't tell you what the process is. I find that bewildering, to be honest. But that's really the only opportunity you've got from a psychological interview perspective to have the decision reviewed. So in other words, if you fail the psych, forget about it. There's no way to review it. The next one is the medical. If you fail because of a medical reason and you feel as though maybe the medical officer hasn't taken into account all of the circumstances and you can provide some compelling information to be able to, impact their perspective of your situation, then you might be able to have it reviewed. Now, unfortunately, over the years, we've had some applicants who have not even returned all of the medical information that they've been asked to return, and yet a decision's already been made. Thank you, but we don't want your application, you're unsuccessful. Well, which is probably a little unfair given that all of the information has not been taken into account. Now, of course, it may be that you have one medical issue that's so strong that it really doesn't matter whatever other information you can provide, you're not going to pass anyway. But that would have to be something pretty severe. So from a medical point of view, if your application was unsuccessful, you can have your GP or your specialist write to the medical officer and ask for feedback. Now, when you get that feedback, you can then make that decision whether or not the decision that was made was fair or whether you think you might have grounds to have that decision reviewed. And if so, you could write to the recruiting office, express your concerns and ask for them to review the decision, have the medical team review the decision. Now, the last one is where your application has been declined based on a character assessment. Now, a specific example that comes to mind for me was where an application was going along fairly well and then all of a sudden it was terminated based on a character assessment. Now, this particular person had a bit of a brain fade and decided that covering the number plate on their vehicle in order to avoid tolls was a good idea at the time. Now, of course, that came up later in the application process, and that very quickly resulted in the application being rejected based on a poor character assessment. Now, if your application is rejected based on character, and you feel as though you've got compelling evidence and information of good character that should be taken into account and that should override or outweigh any negative character assessment that might have been done, then you might request a review. Provide that additional information, provide your reasoning for why you believe a review should be done, and you send that to the recruiting office. Now, the recruiting office, who has already decided that your character is no good, and so they've given you the flick, will decide whether or not the additional information and the argument that you've presented is sufficient to justify the recruiting office forwarding on that request for a review to the review board. Now, that for me doesn't seem very independent. Someone's already made the decision about your character and rejected your application, and now you're asking them to review it to see whether or not they would pass it on for review. But that's the system, that's how it works, and so that's what you need to do. In the first instance, you would need to write to the recruiting office and ask the recruiting services branch to review the additional information and the compelling argument that you've presented with a view to passing that on to the review board. Now, here's the catch. If you are successful with that compelling argument and your application is forwarded on to the review board for a review, which is an independent panel, just like in the real world with the court system, appeals can sometimes backfire, where if you were excluded from applying for Victoria Police again for the next 12 months, they might overturn that and allow you to apply again immediately, or they may uphold that decision to expel you or exclude you for 12 months, or they could increase the time that you have to wait, which is exactly what happened recently with this number plate issue. 12-month exclusion, he managed to get an appeal. The appeal was extended to 2 years, or the result of the exclusion result of the review meant the exclusion was extended out to 2 years. So it doesn't always work out well. Be careful what you wish for. You might get your review only to find out that your punishment is extended. So you have to think carefully about whether or not a review is the best way to go, or whether you should go and stand in the naughty corner, do your time, and come back with a fresh approach and apply again. Alright, well, I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions or comments, the best way to catch us is to visit the website and pop in a contact form. Alright, well, until next time, keep your foot on the gas. Good luck with your application.